Hi there, and welcome to this video lesson on finding out the circumference of a circle. Now, before we begin, I just want to talk about a couple of things, mainly what the circumference actually is. So when we talk about the circumference of a circle, we imagine the circle, and the circumference is this outside edge here. So when we're saying find the circumference of a circle, or find the length of the circumference, basically what we're doing is we're trying to find out how long that outside edge is there. And that's the circumference. One other thing I want to talk about is something called diameter and radius. So the diameter is the length that runs all the way across the circle. That's the diameter, d. So from here to here, passing through the centre, that's the diameter. And the other thing I want to talk about is radius. Now, radius is the length from the centre to the outside edge, like that. And we can see that the radius is half the length of the diameter, and that's always true. So we can put radius equals diameter over 2, just as a little reminder. And the very last thing I want to talk about is the formula for finding out the circumference of a circle. And this formula is C, which is circumference, equals pi times by d, which is the diameter. So this length here. Yeah? And what is pi? Well, pi is a mathematical ratio. It's a number that goes on forever. Pi is 3.14, and then it just keeps going forever and ever and ever. And basically, it's the ratio that whatever you times the diameter of the circle by, you'll always end up with the circumference. And you can find that on most good Casio calculators by pressing the shift in the upper left-hand corner, and then by pressing the times 10 to the power of x. And on your screen, if you press shift times 10 to the power of x, you should end up with pi, like that. Okay, so those are all the things I just wanted to cover before we start. So let's look at this first question. Find the circumference of this circle. Now, whenever you do any sort of circle question, the first thing I want you to write out is the radius and the diameter. And then I want you to look at the circle and figure out what information you have. We can see from this circle, because it goes from one edge to the other edge and passes through the centre, that this length here is the diameter, and that length is 6 centimetres. So in the diameter we can put 6 centimetres. And now if we remember from up here that the radius is always half the diameter, that means the radius here is 3 centimetres, because we've just divided the diameter by 2. Now, whenever you do any circle question, I always want you to write out the radius and the diameter, because it's a really good habit to get into. Okay, now we can start to find the circumference of a circle. So we use the formula circumference, C, equals pi times by d, like so. And what we want to do is we want to swap in our d value up here, which is 6 centimetres, for our d value down there. So we're basically substituting in this d value. So our new line can be C equals pi times by 6. Now, if we get our calculator, we can actually type this bit, this pi times by 6, into our calculator, and that will give us a value for our circumference. So if we do that, so find the pi by doing shift times by 10, or get the pi, and then we times that by 6, we end up with 18.8496 centimetres as our answer. And we know it's centimetres because the diameter is in centimetres. Fantastic. And everything in this lesson we're going to do to one decimal place. So what we do is we cut it off there, and we see if this number is bigger than 5. If it is, then we round that number up. If it's 5 or bigger, we round it up. If it isn't, we keep it exactly the same. So 4 in this case isn't 5 or larger, so we just keep the 8 the same. So the circumference is 18.8 centimetres. And that's our final answer. Okay, so finding the circumference. First step we do is we write down our radius and our diameter. Always do that with our circle question. And then we find out what our radius and our diameter is. The second step, we write down our equation, c equals pi d. And then we substitute in our d value into the equation. So we replace the d with whatever our d value is. And then the last, penultimate step is we find out what that value equals by typing it into our calculator. And our last step is rounding to 1 decimal place. So nice and simple. Okay? So pause the video here, have a go at this left-hand example, and then have a, as in copy out the working for that left-hand example, then have a go at this right-hand example by yourself and play the video once you're done. Okay, fantastic, let's go through this. So, first things first, circle question. We always write down our radius and our diameter. So in this question, we've been given the length that goes from one edge through the centre all the way to the other edge. So we know that this is our diameter. So 8 centimetres is our diameter. We know that our radius is half our diameter. So we can put our radius as 4 centimetres. Now our next step is to write out our equation, which is c equals pi times by d. And I'd always write this out, especially when you're starting out, just so you get it in your head absolutely clearly. And that way in 10, 20 years time or however long, you'll have c equals pi d imprinted in your head. Okay, now the next step is to replace our d value with an actual number. So c equals pi times by 8. And now our next step is to type that into our calculator. So c equals pi times by 8. And if we do that, we end up with 25.1327 centimetres. And we know it's centimetres because our diameter is in centimetres. Okay, we said we're doing everything to 1 decimal place. So let's cut it off there and see if this number is 5 or larger. It isn't, so this number stays the same. So our circumference is 25.1 centimetres. And that's our final answer. If you got that, fantastic, well done. Give yourself some ticks for that. Okay, let's have a look at this second question. Find the circumference. Okay, so this question is a little bit different because as we can see, as opposed to being given the diameter which will go from this edge to this edge, all we've been given is the length that goes from the centre to one of the edges. And what did we say that was? We said that was our radius. Okay? So first things first, with all circle questions, write down the radius and the diameter. So our radius in this question is 6 metres. And we know that diameter, or radius was half the diameter, so therefore diameter must be double the radius. So our diameter must be 12 metres. Okay? Now from here on in, we can approach the question exactly the same as we approached the first one. So let's write out our formula. Circumference equals pi times by d. Pi times by the diameter. Now we substitute our d for an actual number. So we do c circumference equals pi times by 12, because that's our diameter. Now our next step is to type that into our calculator. So if we do pi times by 12, we end up with 37.6991 metres this time, because our radius is in metres. And let's go to 1 decimal place. So we cut it off here and we look, is this number 5 or larger? Yes, it is. Therefore, we round this number up. So our final answer for the circumference is 37.6991 0.7 meters. And that's our final answer. Okay, so just to go over how we find the answer to this question. We write down our radius and our diameter, and then we look at the circle and see whether it's telling us our radius or our diameter. And then we find out those numbers accordingly. We write down our equation. We substitute in our diameter into the equation. We then type that equation into the calculator. And then we round to 1 decimal place. That's how we find the circumference. Okay, so pause the video here, copy out the working for this left-hand example, then have a go at this right-hand example and play the video once you're done. Okay, fantastic. Let's go through this. So, first things first, radius, diameter. What have we been given in the question? Well, we haven't been given the distance that goes from there to there. We've been given the distance that goes from the centre to the edge. So that is the radius. So our radius is 8 meters. We know that our diameter is double our radius. So our diameter is 16 meters. Now we write our equation for finding out the circumference. The circumference equals pi times by the diameter. And then we substitute in a number for the diameter, so 16 in this case. So circumference equals pi times by 16. And now we type it into our calculator. So pi times by 16 gives us 50.2654, and it's in meters because our radius is in meters. And now we're going to 1 decimal place, so we cut it off there and we have a look. Is this number 5 or larger? Yes, it is. So we round that number up. So our final answer for the circumference is the circumference equals 50.3 meters. And that's our final answer. So if you got that, fantastic. Well done. Give yourself some ticks like that. Okay, well done. Let's have a look at this final example. Find the circumference of this left-hand example. Okay, so this left-hand example is a little different because we've got a decimal place in it, but that is no worry. We can treat this exactly the same. So let's start off by finding the radius and the diameter. What have we been given in the question? Well, we've been given the length that goes from one edge through the centre all the way to the other edge. Therefore, that must be the diameter. So we can say that the diameter is 12.5 metres. We know that the radius is always half the diameter, so the radius is going to be 6.25 metres. Okay, we always put down the radius and diameter for our circle questions, and as you go further with your learning experience in terms of circles, you'll understand why we put down the radius, but for the moment, always put down the radius and the diameter. Okay, so let's write out our equation. Circumference equals pi times by the diameter. Now we substitute in a number for the d, so that's our circumference equals pi times by 12.5. And now decimal places work exactly the same, so there's no need to worry about doing it any differently. So we type that into our calculator, pi times by 12.5. And that gives us our circumference of 39.26999 meters, because we're working in meters. Okay, so let's round to 1 decimal place, so we cut it off there. We look at this number and see if it's 5 or bigger. If it is, then we round up this number. 6, 5 or bigger, yes, so we round up the 2. So our circumference to 1 decimal place is 39.3 meters. And that's our final answer. So, going over this, we work it out exactly the same way. We find out our radius, we find out our diameter, and then we write our equation, circumference equals pi times diameter. We substitute in our values, we type it into the calculator, and then we round it to 1 decimal place. Nice and simple. Okay, so pause the video here, copy out the working for this left-hand example, then have a go at this right-hand example and play the video once you're done. Okay, fantastic. Let's go through this. Find the circumference. So, first things first, we write down our radius and we write down our diameter. Now, which one are they giving us? So, in this question, they're giving us the length that goes from this edge through the centre all the way over to this edge. Therefore, that must be the diameter. So, we can write our diameter equals 16.3 metres. If our radius is half our diameter, then our radius is going to be 8.15 metres. Okay? Now let's write out our equation. Circumference equals pi times by the diameter. Now we're going to substitute in a number for our diameter. So circumference equals pi times by 16.3. Now let's type that into our calculator. Pi times by 16.3 gives us 51.2079. And we're working in metres, so that's a metres on the end there. Okay, let's do it to one decimal place. So we cut it off there and we see if this number is 5 or larger. It isn't, so we keep this number the same. So our final circumference to one decimal place is 51.2 metres. And that's your final answer. If you got that, fantastic. Well done. Give yourself some ticks like that. Okay, so what I've done down here is I've given you 3 checks and 1 extension. I would pause the video here, have a go at those 3 checks and the extension if you're feeling brave, and then play the video once you're done and I'll go through the answers. Quickly, with the extension, it's find the perimeter, whereas all the others are find the circumference. Okay, so pause the video here, have a go at those 3 checks and the extension if you're feeling up for it, then play the video once you're done. Okay, let's have a go. Let's go through those 3 checks. So I've just put the first one down here so we have a bit more space. So first things first, radius and diameter. Which one have they given us? Well, we've been given the length that goes from one edge through the centre all the way over to the other edge. Therefore, it's the diameter. So our diameter is 9 centimetres. If our radius is half our diameter, our radius is 4.5 centimetres. What's our equation? Circumference equals pi times by diameter. Let's substitute that in. So circumference equals pi times by 9. Let's type that into our calculator. Pi times by 9. And that gives us 28.2743 centimetres because we're working in centimetres. Okay, if we're doing everything to one decimal place, we cut it off there. We see if that number's 5 or larger. It is. Therefore, we round this number up. So our final answer for the circumference to one decimal place is 28.3 centimetres. And that's our final answer. So if you got that for the circumference, fantastic. Give yourself some ticks like that. Let's have a go at this second question over here. So find the circumference of this circle. First things first, let's write down our radius and our diameter and look at the question and see which one they've given us. Well, they haven't given us the length that goes from this edge through the centre to this edge. They've only given us the length that goes from the centre all the way to one edge. So therefore, that must be our radius. So our radius is 5 metres. If our radius is 5 metres, our diameter is always double our radius. So our diameter is 10 metres. Let's write out our equation. So circumference equals pi times by the diameter. Circumference equals pi times by, let's substitute in our diameter, which is 10. Now let's type that into a calculator. So pi times by 10 is 31.4159. And we're working in metres because it's metres up there. Okay, let's do this to one decimal place. We cut it off there. See if this number's 5 or larger. It isn't, so this number stays the same. So our final circumference length to one decimal place is 31.4 metres. That's our final answer. If you got that for your circumference, fantastic. Give yourself some ticks like that. Well done. Okay, let's have a look at our third check. So all the way down here. First things first, our radius and our diameter. Which one have they given us in the question? Well, they've given us the length that goes from this end through the centre all the way to that end. So therefore that is our diameter. So our diameter is 16.5 centimetres. If our radius is half our diameter, our radius is going to be 8.25 centimetres. Okay, let's write out our formula. So circumference equals pi times by the diameter. Let's substitute in our diameter. So circumference equals pi times by 16.5. Let's type that into our calculator. So pi times by 16.5 gives us 51.8362 centimetres, because we're working in centimetres. Let's take this to one decimal place. So we cut it off there. See if that's 5 or larger. It isn't, so that one stays the same. So our final circumference length to one decimal place is 51.8 centimetres. And that's our final answer. So if you got that, fantastic, well done. Give yourself some ticks like that. And last but not least, let's have a quick look at this extension. So what is different about this question compared to the others? Well, let's have a think. That is a semicircle. And it's also asking for the perimeter. So there's a perimeter and the fact that it's a semicircle. Let's kind of draw that semicircle. Okay, let's start off exactly the same way. So let's write down our radius and our diameter. So the radius or what we've been given in this question is the length from the centre to one of the edges. So that's technically the radius. So our radius is 3 metres. And our diameter is 6 metres, so it must be double. So there's a couple of things we want to work out here. First of all, we want to work out the length of this outside edge. And then we also want to work out the length of that inside edge and then add them together to get the perimeter. Well, the length of that inside edge there, that red one, is going to be the diameter of the circle. So that inside edge equals 6 metres. Now we want to work out what this outside edge equals. So that is actually half the circumference of a whole circle. Because if you imagine that we had a whole circle, the circumference would kind of look like that, but we only have half a circle. So it's half the circumference. So let's work out the circumference of the full circle first. So C equals pi times by D. So C equals pi times by 6. C equals, let's type that in. So pi times by 6. Times by 6 gives us 18.8496. But remember, that is the length of the whole of the outside, whereas we only want half that. So if we half that, we'll find out the length of this section there. And if we do half it, divide that by 2, we get this length to equal 9.425, like that, centimetres. So if we want to find out the perimeter, we have to add all our lengths together. So we have to add our let's get rid of that. So we have to add our 6 metres and our 9.425 centimetres. Oh, it's all in metres, so let's get rid of that. Okay. And if we do that, we end up with, so if we add those two, 15.425 metres. Let's take this to one decimal place, so cut it off there. Is that 5 or larger? No, so that stays the same. So our perimeter is 15.4 metres. And that's our final answer. If you got that, fantastic, well done. Give yourself some ticks. Okay, so This extension was slightly on the hard side, so if you couldn't do it, no worries. As long as you can do these basic 1, 2 and 3, then that's going to serve you in such good stead to sort of like experiment and explore more circle questions in the future. And we can go on to working out volumes of surface areas of cylinders using this method. We can do some really interesting like real world problems with maybe basketball courts and everything like that. So it's good. It's a good skill to have. So what I suggest you do now is have a look at the link in the description to find the Corbett Maths worksheet. Do a question, then check the answer. Do a question, check the answer. Do a question, check the answer. And if you do that for all the questions, you'll really consolidate the skills that we've learned in today's lesson, and it will be so useful for the future. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed this lesson today, and I hope you found it useful, and I shall see you in the next lesson.